When Daniel turned 68, no one used the word old. They chose kinder words, safer words, experienced, distinguished, still sharp, still relevant. In professional circles, Daniel Reed was a name that carried weight. Senior partner at a respected Boston law firm. For decades of victories, negotiations, settlements, courtroom precision. His office sat high above the Charles River. Glass walls, controlled light, a skyline view designed to suggest clarity, power, success. Everything about his life looked correct. The tailored suits, the polished shoes, the carefully measured tone of voice. The calendar booked weeks ahead. But long before the diagnosis, his body had started sending messages. Not dramatic ones. Not urgent enough to disrupt a meeting. Just subtle signals. A fatigue that clung to him even after sleep. A heaviness that coffee could no longer dissolve. A strange tightness in his chest that appeared and disappeared like an uninvited thought. He dismissed it all with the efficiency of a man trained to prioritize. Age, he told himself. Stress. Workload. He had explanations for everything, except the quiet, growing sense that something inside him was wearing thin. At night, sleep abandoned him first. Daniel would lie awake in the darkness, the ceiling a blank screen for unfinished arguments, client strategies, rehearsed conversations that would never matter beyond the next quarter. Beside him, Catherine slept lightly, years of learning how to rest next to a mind that was always somewhere else. Sometimes she would turn toward him and whisper, "Dan, you're still awake?" "I'm fine," he'd murmur automatically. He said, "I'm fine," the way other people breathed, without thinking, without checking if it was true. Daniel had always believed endurance was a virtue. In law school, he survived on ambition and caffeine. In his 30s, he worked 14-hour days without complaint. In his 40s, weekends quietly dissolved into deadlines. In his 50s, flights replaced vacations, negotiations replaced dinners. He took pride in being the one who never slowed down. While others spoke of burnout, Daniel spoke of discipline. While colleagues scheduled time off, Daniel scheduled more work. He treated exhaustion as proof of importance. His identity fused seamlessly with productivity. Without work, who was he? He never asked the question directly, but he spent an entire lifetime running from it. Catherine had once tried to compete with his schedule. In the early years of their marriage, she waited for him at dinner, saved stories from her day, planned weekends, trips, small surprises. Daniel would arrive late, apologetic but distracted. Big case, unexpected call, client emergency, always something reasonable, always something unavoidable. Eventually, Catherine stopped waiting, not out of anger, out of adaptation. Their son, Michael, learned the same lesson. There were empty seats at school plays, missed baseball games, birthdays celebrated around conference calls. Daniel loved his family, fiercely, sincerely, but he expressed love through provision. A larger house, better schools, generous gifts, things instead of time, comfort instead of presence. And because no one wanted conflict, no one screamed. No dramatic confrontations. No ultimatums. The house simply grew quieter. Rooms filled with furniture. Air filled with unspoken distance. The first undeniable warning arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. A meeting. Financial projections. A client complaining about risk exposure. Daniel leaned forward to respond. And then pain. Sudden. Sharp. Crushing. It tore through his chest like a violent interruption. His breath vanished. Sweat beaded instantly along his spine. The room's sounds collapsed into a dull, underwater echo. "Daniel?" someone asked. He forced a smile, gripping the edge of the table. "I'm fine," but his hand trembled. 10 minutes later, he sat alone in his car, fingers white against the steering wheel, heart pounding with an unfamiliar rhythm, wild, erratic, disobedient. For the first time, fear crept in. Not professional pressure, not anxiety about outcomes, primitive fear, the kind that bypasses logic. Hospitals compress reality. Time behaves strangely under fluorescent lights. Tests, waiting, machines humming with indifferent patience. Daniel sat in a thin gown, stripped of the armor he had worn for decades. Suit, title, certainty. Across from him, the doctor spoke calmly, measured voice, practiced empathy. And then came the word that fractured everything. Tumor. Daniel's mind froze around it. The syllables echoed, enormous and unreal. He didn't hear the rest. Not staging, not treatment options, not survival rates. Just that single word, hanging in the air between them like a verdict he had never imagined receiving. Illness had always belonged to other people, clients, acquaintances, statistics, not to him, not to the man who had spent a lifetime believing control was simply a matter of effort. Driving home, the city looked unfamiliar. Same streets, same bridges, same skyline, yet everything seemed slightly displaced, as if reality itself had shifted half an inch to the side. At home, Catherine sat at the kitchen table. She listened without interruption, without panic. When Daniel finished, silence settled between them, heavy, dense. "The doctor says we caught it early," he added, clinging to optimism like a legal argument. Catherine nodded, but her eyes held something deeper than fear, recognition, as if life had finally spoken aloud what she had sensed for years. That night Daniel wandered through the house unable to sleep. He paused before old photographs lining the hallway. Michael at 10, grinning in a baseball uniform. Catherine on a windy Cape Cod beach, hair wild, eyes bright. Family dinners, holidays, ordinary moments preserved behind glass. Daniel stared at the images. He was there in them, but the memories felt distant, blurred. He remembered the cases from those years, the negotiations, the deadlines, but not the laughter, not the conversations, not the texture of those days. Success had filled his calendar, but it had quietly erased his presence from his own life. Illness imposes a brutal stillness. Chemotherapy reduced Daniel's world to cycles of nausea, weakness, waiting. The man who once thrived on velocity now measured victories in small, fragile units. A morning without dizziness. An afternoon with enough strength to walk to the mailbox. A meal he could keep down. In that forced slowness, thoughts surfaced. Uninvited, unavoidable. Daniel realized he wasn't most afraid of dying. He was afraid of understanding. Afraid of seeing clearly how he had lived. Always preparing for life instead of living it. Always sacrificing today for a tomorrow that kept retreating like the horizon. He had traded sleep for productivity. Health for reputation. Presence for achievement. Now he was trading achievement to recover fragments of his health, a negotiation no skill could win. One evening, weakened but lucid, Daniel sat across from Catherine. No laptop, no phone, just two people who had shared decades yet somehow missed each other along the way. "Kate, I'm sorry." The words came out raw, unfamiliar. Catherine looked at him for a long time. Then tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. "I didn't need your success, Dan," she whispered. "I needed you." There was no accusation in her voice, only truth. And truth, Daniel realized, was far more devastating than anger. Something shifted after that night. Not the illness, not the uncertainty, but Daniel's orientation toward time. He began waking early to sit by the window, watching morning light move slowly across the river. He listened to music he had once loved but abandoned to adulthood. He called Michael awkward at first, then honest. He said words he had once considered unnecessary. Love. Thank you. I miss you. Each conversation felt like recovering a piece of himself long buried beneath deadlines. Daniel did not suddenly become fearless. He remained a man navigating treatments, side effects, fragile hope. But for the first time, he stopped postponing life. One morning, voice soft but steady, he turned to Catherine. Let's go see the ocean. She smiled, a smile he hadn't truly noticed in years. And in that simple moment was more meaning than in 40 years of professional triumphs. Illness does not always arrive only to take. Sometimes it arrives to reveal. That time is not guaranteed. That health is not renewable. That love cannot survive indefinitely on assumption. And that life exists in only one place. Not in the future. Not in memory. But here. Now.